Okay, so let's talk about sound insulation. Well, sound insulation, some people might say, why bother with a Land Rover? But actually, the noisier a vehicle is, and the more sort of rattly and obnoxious it is to drive around in, the most effect you can have from sound insulation. And I can tell you, for working on my previous truck, maybe I can show you some clips. Have you seen any clips of sound insulation? Yeah, you probably did. Anyway, a little bit of sound insulation goes a long way, and I mean a really long way. It makes an amazing difference in the way the drivability of the truck and the comfort, especially on long trips. So I'm making some actually rather heroic efforts at sound insulation. My previous truck, as you saw some pictures, I used an assortment of different sound insulation products, which I'll describe to you. On this truck, I'm doing it slightly differently. One of the major problems I had with the previous truck, the truck was called Jake. I'll refer to it as Jake in the future. Anyway, underneath, I used a foam lead composite sound insulation, an excellent product from a company called Be Quiet in Western Canada. At some point I'm sure I'm going to put up a page of links, but I haven't done it yet, I know. Anyway, it was a foam, relatively thick lead foil foam composite, which I adhered to the bottom of the seat box and the floors and the transmission tunnel and the footwells. And it was fantastic. The truck was like silent to drive. Okay, I'm fibbing, but really, really quiet. But because there was exposed open cell foam, I really knew I was pushing my luck with it. In winter, ice would form on it, and thicker and thicker and thicker. You know what kind of ice forms underneath your car in winter? Well, maybe you don't in the UK, but I can tell you in Canada it's quite severe. And the weight of it eventually just pulls it right off the bottom of the truck. So in 2 seasons, I suddenly had no sound insulation on the bottom, or there was a little bit of ratty stuff hanging around. So I had to find a way to either make sure the insulation didn't come off or put the insulation on the inside. Now the whole point with sound insulation really is to put it on the noisy side. That's not always the case, but we'll get into that in more detail. But basically the sound insulation I'm going to put on the bottom of the truck, in other words under the seat box and under the footwells, is going to have to go on the noisy side, outside the truck on the bottom. And to do that, I'm going to adhere it to the bottom with a double-sided contact cement, basically. Spray-on adhesive contact cement. This is the product I'm going to use. It's not lead this time because it's getting incredibly expensive to buy lead. It's a heavy vinyl foam composite, and it's considered an excellent sound deadening material. Again, we're going to get into the different types of sound insulation, but we'll get into that. So this is going to go on the bottom of the truck. I'm going to use a spray adhesive, a 3M spray adhesive. And then I'm going to rhino line over it. Rhino lining I'm using as a generic term. The product I'm going to use is actually called Reflex Truck Bed Liner. It's a spray in place urethane truck bed liner up to 3/16 to almost 1/4 of an inch thick. And what it'll do is it'll encapsulate this stuff in on the bottom of the truck, sealing the edges and guaranteeing it never falls off. It seems kind of severe, but again, I like a quiet truck. Anyway, more on that later. Let's get busy. I'll show you how I'm going to do this. Okay, so listen, I'm thrilled. This is going really well. I've got one side of the seat box done. This is the regular seat box that all Land Rovers come with. I was fortunate in fact, that this seat box is out of a Series II. So the toolbox underneath that side of the seat box is aluminum, so it's in perfect condition. And I had my local fabricator put a matching toolbox in on this side. And so now I've got lots of room because I'm going to a rear tank. This divot, of course, this notch that's cut out of the toolbox in all Land Rover seat boxes, of course, is very annoying for 109 owners because that notch is to clear the frame on an 88. However, it's just a complete waste of space on a 109. So you 88 people, you ruin it for all of us. See ya. Okay, so sound insulation. There's really 3 kinds of sounds in a car or a Land Rover that we're concerned about. And all 3 of those different kinds of sounds are treated different ways. Or in other words, we can attenuate, limit them 3 different ways. There's basically noise that is generated by the vehicle itself. That tends to be panel drumming, and we're all familiar with that. It's what happens when vibration rattles part of the Land Rover. Well, anyone who's running a hardtop knows exactly what that's like. You bang on a hardtop or bang on pretty much any part of a Land Rover. So that's noise that's generated by mechanical energy shaking the Land Rover. The second kind of noise is noise from outside. Basically the engine making a bunch of noise that wants to come up through the floorboards or through the bulkhead into the cab. And that's also tire noise, that's also wind noise, any noise that's outside that you'd rather not have inside. And the last kind of noise is a noise that makes it inside and you want to keep from bouncing around inside. So you want to somehow, every time that wave of energy, wave of sound, basically sound wave, hits one of the surfaces inside the cab, you'd like it not to bounce right back at you. Well, I can tell you that metal pickup cab is not particularly good for that. It bounces right back off. So the three kinds of sound are basically noises created by the Land Rover itself by drumming, in other words, the mechanical energy that goes into the sheet metal, which turns into sound energy. The sound energy that came out from outside, the cow mooing, any kind of noise that's outside you want to keep from getting inside. And the last kind is the sound that's already inside, like the stereo playing too loud or whatever you want, that you'd rather, attenuate a little bit. So you deal with those three different sounds in three different ways. Basically, the simplest to understand really is the drumming. Basically, if you can make the surface of the sheet metal less sensitive to becoming a drum, or to becoming basically a speaker, which is what it's doing. As it rattles, as it shakes the air around it, which comes and bounces on our ear. Well, the easiest way to keep it from doing that is to make it heavy. Well, if I tap on the concrete floor, it doesn't really make much sound because it's incredibly heavy. It takes a lot of mass, and it has a lot of mass, and me knocking on it with my knuckles doesn't move it very much, therefore it doesn't make very much sound. The sheet metal in the Land Rover is very, very light, and that's why it's particularly bad at drumming. So the trick is to make it heavy. Sometimes you want to make it, mass. You could drill it full of holes and put lots of little lead plugs all over it. That would actually work, but not very effective. So what we got to do is we got to apply some surface to the sheet metal that's going to make it heavy. And there's lots of products like that. In North America, we have something called brown bread. It's very popular with the stereo guys. Brown bread is like a heavy bituminous tarry sheet that's self-adhesive, and you apply it right to the sheet metal, and it adds mass, and it adds weight. So when the sheet metal wants to shake, it can't shake as much, therefore it doesn't create as much sound. So that's one of the types of sound. I'm dealing with that largely by applying the truck bed liner. Basically, it's that spray-in truck bed liner that everyone's seen. I don't know if it's popular in the UK or not, but amongst some truck owners in North America, it's quite popular. It's a bit controversial to put it in Land Rovers, and well, I've done it on a previous truck, Jake, and I was thrilled with it, so I'm doing it again. Anyway, that does a really good job of attenuating the drumming because it's heavy and it bonds directly to the sheet metal and keeps it from rattling too much. Okay, second kind of sound. You want to keep the sound that's already outside from coming in. Well, that's where this stuff comes in. What you need is a barrier, some heavy surface that when sound hits it, it shakes it, and the weight of it takes a lot of energy out of the sound, so it basically doesn't transmit that sound beyond. And that is usually a heavy membrane. Sometimes it's a composite. In the case of this stuff, it's a composite where we have a heavy layer of vinyl backed with a light layer of foam. So what happens is the foam acts like a spring. So the sound is shaking the vinyl. The spring, the foam is allowing it to shake and absorb all the energy. And in fact, the sound turns into heat energy in foam. Not very much, but that's basically what's happening. So this is the type of insulation you put in your truck or wherever you're trying to sound insulate, where you want to keep the sound from coming through. Most common case in a Land Rover is under the floor. Most of the noise tends to come from the engine, the transmission, the transfer case, the road, stuff like that. So that's why I'm going to some trouble to insulate the bottom of the seat box, and pretty soon I'll be doing the firewall, bulkhead, and all the floors. So that's really what deals with the sound that's trying to get into the truck. The last type of sound, as I said, is the sound that's already in the truck and you want to keep it from bouncing around. Well, that just needs very soft materials. Basically, a headliner on a car is quite a lightweight, soft, puffy type of material. And so when sound hits that, it's quite intuitive. You can understand the energy shakes that as well and doesn't bounce back. So the interior of your cab should really be light and fluffy. Well, it's not very Land Rover-y, so you have to find some other material that's sort of suitable for that, that still will reduce that noise bouncing around inside. And that's actually the part of the sound insulation puzzle that I haven't actually fully solved yet. I'm tempted to just put more of this sound deadening that I'm using here on this inside of the cab and inside of the door panels, but it's not the ideal product, except I can run a line right over it. It'll be robust, it'll be weatherproof, I can hose it right out, and it'll do a pretty good job, but it's not ideal. So I may get back to that. Anyway, soundproofing 101. Got to get back to doing this gluing. It's pretty miserable work, actually. See ya. There we go, all done. All insulated up, and all the edges caulked with urethane caulk. And by the time I rhino line that, I think that'll be really quite robust. Really pleased. It weighs about 3 times as much as it used to, I'll tell you that. Anyway, I'm going to tidy this up just a little bit more, just a few little edges to fold over and stuff, and then onto the bulkhead. See ya. Okay, now the bulkhead might be a little trickier. Basically, I'm going to do all of the footwells, all through here, and up to this line here. And it should be relatively straightforward. It's just a matter of deciding which sides overlap which and how can I make sure those seams are well caulked so that they become a good edge for the rhino lining, or reflex lining. Apologies to reflex truck bed liner. If I keep saying rhino, it's because of the sort of generic term of it. It's kind of the Kleenex thing. But I'll make an effort to say reflex because actually I much prefer the product. I've never actually even used rhino lining. My previous truck, I think we have pictures. Pictures, do we have? Gotta be some pictures, are they? Hopefully you saw some pictures. I did with another product called Armourthane, which actually held up very, very well. It's bulletproof stuff, but it's very hard. And the reflex is much more rubbery, which I really like because it's going to make a better sound insulation, and it also keeps your stuff from sliding around in the bed of the truck. So I'm really looking forward to that. Anyway, I got to get moving here. This is going to be an enormous video. See ya. Of course, you know, another great advantage of this sort of system is that it plugs up a lot of unnecessary holes rather than having all these welded up, because this bulkhead's actually already been galvanized. It would have been really a pain. Actually, I think I counted 87 extra holes in this bulkhead. Welcome back. Well, I've got the bulkhead done. Really, really, really pleased with the way this is working out. The stuff bonds like crazy. I mean, it feels soft here, but it's because the foam underneath is quite resilient. But the foam is really well bonded, and I can tell you why I know. Because I cut out the two notches here that are where the bolt holes are for the bulkhead uprights. I could have probably squeezed the sound insulation between the bulkhead uprights and the bulkhead at this location, because there's probably plenty of slop in the bulkhead uprights, but I really, really wanted to make sure that this was a very, very rigid joint. One of the things that I think is really pretty much pathetic about the way Land Rovers are designed is the way the bulkhead is attached to the frame. I mean, really, down here on this characteristically flimsy mount, then up here, then down here again, the triangulation on this is just pathetic. It's really a very bad setup. And that's really what exacerbates one of the problems with steering, because all the force from the steering is transmitted through this area right here. And it just, if anything is at all sloppy or rusty or a mess, it's really, really horrible. That's one of the reasons I'm really happy to go with power steering, because it removes the bulkhead from the stress of the steering at all. Okay, so this is something I've wanted to do for a long time. And I've just, okay. This little piece of aluminum is going to do something for me that I've, as I said, wanted to do for a very long time. And I'm not the first person to do this. But if you drive a Series 2 or 2A Land Rover, this little parcel shelf along the top of the bulkhead, let me get you in perspective here. Parcel shelf, bulkhead, has an open trough at the end. I'm hoping you can see this in the camera. Well, for the longest time, I've wanted to put a little piece of aluminum or something in there so that all the junk you put up here in the trough doesn't slide off the end every time you go around a corner. Now, it might have been a little slicker to do this by welding at some time previously. However, this bulkhead's already been galvanized, and I'm just not getting going on welding anymore. So actually, I'm just going to epoxy this little piece of aluminum in there. And then when it's all rhino lined, reflex lined, it'll look like it's, you know, pretty solid, and I'm pretty sure it's robust. Okay, so you're all wondering about the red tape. What's with all the red tape, Peter? Well, in a never-ending quest to annoy all series Land Rover owners, as I told you, I'm reflex lining the entire inside of the bulkhead, right to the top, right through up into where the vents are. The reason I'm doing that is because I love Series 2 bulkheads. I love the fact that they have all this storage, and I use it a lot. I have all kinds of stuff rolling around back in there, tape measures, tools, impact screwdrivers, all kinds of stuff. And the problem is, half of it gets lost. Little bits and pieces are always dropping out through and onto the floor, or worse yet, in through the big holes and in behind the instrument panel. Probably getting pretty dizzy looking at the bulkhead upside down. So, I'm not taping over the holes just so that the holes are taped over with red tape. When they spray the reflex liner on it, it won't harm this tape at all, and it'll create a skin right across the top of it, and I'll have a 3/16 layer of rubber all the way in here, and the tape will basically be just disappeared. It'll also be sprayed in from the bottom, so by the time this is finished, it'll all just be as if these holes were never here. So the only holes I'm really saving are the steering column mount holes for the driver, and the one hole up here, which is for the wire for my heated windshields. That's why I don't need these defrost holes anymore. Anyway, I'm gonna make the little aluminum dam for the other side, epoxy it in, and pretty soon I gotta call it a night. See ya.